Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. Today I have a massive comparison for you today between two mass monsters. We all know Cutler, 2009 J to be exact, is one of the most legendary physiques to ever hit a bodybuilding stage. This cemented him on bodybuilding's Mount Rushmore. Quite literally, there are maybe 3 physiques better than this ever in the eyes of most fans. But today I'm going to challenge that perspective. In this video, Cutler will be going against another mass monster and a fellow Olympia winner, Big Ramy. Ramy was even bigger than Jay and had one of the most dominant victories since the Phil Heath era. I know some of you are probably rolling your eyes, but I promise this is closer than you think. How close exactly? Well, let's jump into today's video to find out. Remember, if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. Now, of course, we always have to talk about sizing, and if my sizing is off on any of these poses, it's going to be this one. For some reason, there just isn't a good pick of Ramy's 2020 front double. This is one of the best there are, actually, as far as I know. Obviously, it's not the best quality-wise, and it's very hard to size with it. Luckily, for other poses, I could size them quite easily because they stood next, or at least close to each other at the 2013 Olympia. So this pose may be a little inaccurate, but bear with me. Anyway, we're starting here in the front double with a very strong pose for each guy. Jay's physique flows a bit better in this shot and he's more balanced, proportional, all that jazz, but Ramy is not too far behind in those aspects, at least in this shot, and he's bigger. However, bigger is not always better. Case in point, the quads. Ramy's later versions are completely marred by his quads, at least to me. I'll talk more about this in the next pose. I suppose they look fine here in this shot. They look pretty separated, but they're still throwing off his balance big time. Even though Jay's are not in perfect balance with the rest of his physique, either they are a touch too small for his waist, I still prefer him here for sure. The details more than make up for his loss in size to Ramy, and they just look like quads made up of actual muscle. Then in the torso, I prefer Ramy when we're just isolating it. He has the smaller waist and bigger lats, but to be honest, I think Jay's torso works better with everything in tandem. And finally in the arms, I have Ramy here too. He's very massive, he's hard, and more symmetrical. So we're starting out with a very close pose in this comparison, and I will be using my regular judging system of 1 to 3 points for small to dominant wins. I'm going with Jay. I'm not really vibing with Ramy's legs, and I've always really liked Jay's front double despite some of the issues others cite. It just comes together as a pose more to my eye. But I will admit, with this pose being as close as it is, it really comes down to personal preference at this point. The front lat spread shows us who is structurally superior, and it's not Jay, it's Ramy. Ramy had one of the best structures in bodybuilding, period. He's not an aesthetic flex wheeler, but he's one of the widest competitors ever and still has a small waist and a good X-frame. Now Jay's pose I think is a bit underrated. It's certainly not the best, but it's a well-rounded pose and he has decent lats. He was always one of the wider guys through the shoulders too, but Ramy is even wider. Ramy wins everything up top, in fact. I prefer him in the delts, chest, and arms, and he's got Jay beat through the lats. But to me, Ramy's quads once again really hold him back. They're gross, quite frankly. They're way too big and they're not in balance with the rest of his physique or even the calves for that matter. The detail is also really strange on them in most shots. It's muddled most of the way through, and once you get halfway up the quads, he has zero separation. Contrast this with Jay, who has detail knee to hip, and this isn't even him flexing them fully. But I mean, put his quad stomp next to Ramy's quads, the difference is staggering in terms of quality. But we'll get there soon. I think if Ramy had his legs from 2013, 15, maybe even a bit later, I could make this pose 2 points. For now, I'm just making it 1. I know that seems harsh, but half of Ramy's body is totally irredeemable in my mind. He'll win the pose, but not with much impact on the final scores. At this point, I think we do have to kind of face facts. Ramy is doing pretty well so far, and that includes this pose. I'm going to have to stop making excuses for Jay. For my money, Ramy has the best side chest ever, at least top 3. So that means Jay is not winning. Not only that, but from the get-go, I never liked his front chest pose. First off, Ramy sweeps the side leg. We can debate on whether or not he has the best side chest pose as a whole, but there is no doubt he has the single best side leg ever. Then in the midsection, this was actually the first thing I noticed about Jay's pose. It was his gut. This is partially why turning to the front too much was not a good move for him. So Ramy wins there too. And in the upper limb, I'll just call this a tie. They're pretty similar. But finally in the pecs, I'd have Ramy taking the win because he's a bit harder and more detailed. But Jay is very full, so that win for Ramy is nothing too substantial. Ramy's structural superiority is just the icing on the cake. He's bigger and wider overall than Jay, and with a win in the upper and lower halves of the pose, I think that equals a solid 2-point win for him. The rear double presents the same issue for both gentlemen, so let's address that first. They both have the issue of receding lats. Ramy is notorious for that by this point, but Jay not so much. But it was definitely a factor on his physique by 2009. His issue isn't as bad though. Ramy lacks a lot more thickness in the lower lat region, and his lats had receded higher by this point. It opens up a completely blank spot in his pose. So while it's an issue for both guys, it is a slightly bigger one on Ramy, but for the most part they are canceling each other out. In terms of what's left in the back, I have Jay winning pretty clearly. Jay doesn't get enough credit for his back. He had to build it up to what it is to face the great Ronnie Coleman. Even with the lat issue, I think Jay's back is more than solid. The upper back thickness and detail is very impressive. Ramy, on the other hand, never quite grew into his back. It's fine, but of course not only does he have the lat issue, but the rest of the back is flat and underwhelming. He simply does not have the depth of Jay. The limbs don't offer much padding to Ramy's margin either. The arms and delts are pretty much just a tie, and Ramy wins the lower body, yes, but just by a few percent. He's slightly drier, but Jay is bringing everything we ask for, so it's not really a loss for him per se. So to match Ramy's 2-point win in the last pose, Jay is going to take 2 points here in the rear double. The rear lat spread is probably the pose I contemplated the most. I always had Ramy winning in my thought processes, but the margin is what I was caught up on. For the lower body, it's very close. I'd have Ramy just slightly ahead again though for that extra dryness, but Jay is bringing literally everything one could ask for. There's no real winner here because they both are. Now for the back, I do prefer some aspects on Jay. The thickness is the main thing. Ramy's back looks very thin and empty. Jay doesn't have the thickest back, but there's some actual meat and substance to his back. Ramy's again just looks empty. No doubt it's because his lats were atrophying. I also prefer the shape to Jay's back. It has a nice uniform V look. But despite those things, Ramy does have the most important thing of all, width. I think that wins in the pose because I'm really not a fan, and because I'm so unsure, I'm going to just give him a consecutive 1-point win here. He wins, but I do like Jay more. Another underrated pose from him. The side tricep is a battle of upper versus overall. Does a better upper half outweigh a more complete pose? Well, first off, Ramy wins the lower half. Let's get that out of the way. Again, the best lower body ever for the side poses. Jay does win the upper half though. Is it as resoundingly? Probably not. Jay's side tri is legendary, but the gap in the lower bodies is quite large. In the upper body, he's not winning the pecs, but he does manage to win the midsection and the tricep, which are probably the two most important things in the shot, but this pose is actually one with a lot of moving parts. And is Ramy's upper half bad? No, he won the pecs as mentioned, the midsection is tight, but the abs aren't as good, and it's the same with the tricep. It's okay, but I'd like to see it a bit more separated. So here's the dilemma. Do you go with Jay for the better upper half, or Ramy who has the much better lower half and doesn't lag too far behind up top? Well, this is going to be a hot take, but I just prefer a more complete pose more often than not. I know it's not the side leg pose, but Ramy's upper half isn't bad either. Again, what's worse, the side leg for Jay or the upper half for Ramy? It's definitely the former. And truth be told, I already calculated the final scores with a 1-point win going to Ramy in this pose, and it would be a little tedious to change it for now. So I'm going with my original plan to just give Ramy 1 point in the shot. Speaking of great poses for Jay, this next shot is his shot. Really, I think the quad stomp and the subsequent abs pose are half the reason 2009 is so iconic. The comeback and the physique are one thing, but having iconic photos to go along with it really helps this version stand the test of time. The only reason this won't be a clean sweep for Jay is because Ramy is technically, on paper, fine. He has quads and abs. I think we all know how I feel about his quads by now though. Just plain gross, but they're there. And his abs are there as well. He could do worse, and it's technically a complete pose. But Jay's just so much better in terms of quality. You can really see what I've been saying here about Ramy's quads when you compare them to Jay's. What makes Jay's quads so good isn't necessarily the size, it's the complete development of every head of the quad. And the calves too for that matter. But the kicker's the separation and detail. He has clean lines all the way from his knee to the hip. And the cherry on top is all that feathering. Ramy is muddled, murky, and plain tumorous looking. It's kind of the same in the abs. Ramy is just meh, but to be fair, Jay's abs are very unsymmetrical. However, I think that messy look actually kind of works for Jay because he's so shredded. It has this gnarly kind of look to it. And keep in mind, this photo is washing out Jay's detail a little bit. But don't we all have that iconic quad stomp image burned into our minds at this point? I think we all know better. But if you don't, just think Jay was even better than he looked in this photo. This is another win for Jay top to bottom, but because Ramy has good top to bottom elements too, I'm just settling on a 2-point win. And finally, we have the most muscular. To be honest, I always kind of found these guys underwhelming in the shot despite them being mass monsters. Jay was really only bringing a decent crab pose in 09. His other shots definitely weren't as good, but this crab is solid. I just feel like it could be better. He does have what we want though, round delts and arms, traps too, and he has a thick chest, but he needs more detail there. I think the better elements for him are things that are actually downplayed in this variation, like the abs, which look really locked in and shredded, and the quads, but we just talked about those. The quads are certainly more pleasing than Ramy's, that goes without saying by this point in this matchup, but other than that, I think Ramy wins by just carrying more muscle and he's freakier. He also has great upper limbs and traps, he has the better chest too, but I think this is more of a win for him because of the overall look, not so much the body parts. Altogether, he's the most muscular guy in the most muscular pose, and he has more freak factor than Jay. That is what gets Ramy a small 1-point win in the final pose of this comparison. Next, we have the second round of judging, which include the 4 overall physique categories. Let's start with muscularity. This is pretty simple. They're both mass monsters, but Ramy is fitting that definition a bit better. While Jay was huge and wide, Ramy was even bigger and wider. Ramy was also of similar completeness as well. But the lack of quality muscle does hinder him a bit here. There are certainly some questionable spots on his physique, which does warrant you to ask if it's even muscle, but he'll get a point here, which is certainly not easy to do against Jay Cutler. Next, in terms of overall condition, we have a tie. Ramy would have won this category too with another small victory if not for those same areas with the suspicious lack of detail. But Ramy was probably a touch drier compared to Jay, with them roughly being in the same condition though. And that brings us to flaws and shape, which are two categories I want to group together because the same problem plagues Ramy in both. It's mainly the quads. For one, they throw off his shape. His balance is quite off. Jay has better balance and harmony to his physique, which definitely says something. He certainly wasn't the most aesthetic or symmetrical Olympia winner ever, but the overall flow to his physique was definitely better. Ramy's quads are also an issue to me on their own. I don't even want to look at them, and they stuck out to me more here in this matchup than any other I've done with him. Jay had some of the best quads ever, and to put that next to Ramy opens up a major divide in what I think is Ramy's biggest weakness. I think Ramy's back is honestly less of a problem. I don't want those overgrown blobs anywhere near the Sandow, but that doesn't mean he didn't deserve to win in 2020, because he definitely did. He's just lucky that Jay wasn't on the stage that day, because Ramy would have really been exposed. So with that said, I'm going to give Ramy a total 2-point loss here. You can put it all in the shape category or in the flaws category. I'll give him a 1-point loss in both. It doesn't really matter. I just want to punish him for that. Well, I told you this would be closer than you all probably thought. I'm sure a lot of you scoffed at the sheer premise of this video, and to be honest, I kinda did too. But I still wanted to put it together, and I'm glad I did. I do agree that this is very close, at least on paper. But Jay Cutler still won this comparison with 52.6 points to Ramy's 47.4. But that's barely above a 5-point difference. Not only that, but I had Ramy actually taking more mandatories, 5-3, and it was razor thin in the overall categories. I was also pretty generous to Jay, I feel, but he's earned that right. He's one of the greatest. But on paper, I'd actually be okay with Ramy coming out on top by a slight margin. However, that isn't indicative of the full picture. While I agree with my own results that it's close, I would never truly have Ramy as the winner here. The best he can do is close. But I think we need to understand why this was so narrow in the first place. Well, sheer raw mass on a good structure combined with good condition is actually a really good recipe for success. Again, just take those elements and add them up, and that equation should be equal to a great package that would be tough for anyone to beat. Size and condition is more than half of bodybuilding. But under the surface, Ramy had issues. Quite frankly, there are some things that I find downright gross. That sentiment is mainly confined to the quads, but that's half the body. To be quite honest, those aren't Olympia level quads. Again, that doesn't mean I don't think Ramy shouldn't have won 2020. He was the rightful winner. But that's not what bodybuilding is to me, and I think a lot of us would agree with that. He also had the receding lat issue on top of that, worse so than Jay. Maybe these are nitpicks to you, maybe you think they're bigger issues, but they're pretty big stains on a physique objectively. This is where Jay's quality advantage really came in clutch for him. That's the only thing, really. Besides that, I think Big Ramy actually wins. But when Big Ramy has these tumors for quads next to Jay's, which are in contention for the best ever, Ramy gets exposed for oil building instead of bodybuilding. If only Ramy had peaked earlier in his career and his back was better and his legs were in better proportion with the rest of him, this probably would be different. Bodybuilding history in general would be very different if Big Ramy had figured it out sooner. Like if he took a 2015 Arnold Brazil package, for example, and slapped on better condition, I think he would probably beat Jay. With that said, out of the bodybuilding Mount Rushmore 4, I think Jay is probably the weakest of the bunch, but I digress. As it stands though, I cannot have 2020 Big Ramy over 2009 Jay, but I'll give credit to where it's due. Ramy is close. He has the prerequisites. He has the size, structure, and condition to be put on that Mount Rushmore actually. But he's missing that X factor that those four all had. I don't mean freak factor, I just mean that it factor, that aura. Jay, Ronnie, Phil, Dorian, even a few others all had it. We can kind of get glimpses of it from Ramy, sure, but put him next to Jay or any of the other three, we can see that there are tiers to this sport even at the highest level. And the differences between those tiers are small, but make all the difference between a heavyweight matchup like this. Ramy is missing those finishing touches that bring a physique like Jay's altogether. And I think Jay's nickname is very apt for summing this situation up. Ramy is big, conditioned, he's got it all on paper. But Jay Cutler is truly a cut above.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Well, that's going to do it for today's video. I know this will be a little controversial, and I don't think I really articulated my point too well in the end there, but I do want to know your guys' thoughts. Do you see that extra element in certain athletes like Ronnie or Jay? Was Ramy actually close? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you guys like this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. And if you guys are in need of some high quality supplements and want to support my channel even further, be sure to head over to Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, use my code PROJECT10 to get 10% off your entire order. That's code PROJECT10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Gotta get that Lexi, yeah.